One of the things I've never understood about live service games is just how often they struggle with communication. It blows my mind all the time that you can have a game like Call of Duty that just prints billions of dollars, has hundreds and hundreds of thousands of players all the time. And there can be something like a totally broken mechanic or weapon or whatever. Like you remember like DMR Zone when that was just totally broken, or when the gallantry was broken, or when the akimbo pistols were totally broken, or the Dragon's Breath shotgun was totally I'm realizing now that pretty much every gun in Call of Duty has been totally broken at one point or multiple times. But anyway, there were all of these weapons that were just totally broken, and they wouldn't say anything about it for like a week and a half before they would acknowledge the problem and then patch it out. My conspiracy theory is that I think they did it intentionally because they almost always had the gun that was broken for sale in the in-game store. So it's like, if you don't want to grind multiplayer for it, and if you want that gun to be able to use it, even like now that it's meta, you can buy it for $20, get the bundle, play with the game for a week and a half, be competitive. Because if you don't play with that gun, you're going to get basically two-tapped and you don't stand a chance competitively. That's my theory. I think they did it intentionally, but that's beside the point. They never were very communicative, never very direct or open about any of this. It was just very, very hush hush. And it's like they thought that maybe they would say like talking about it could bring more attention to the problem. So they just don't refer to it, don't acknowledge it. Maybe it's that old political saying. I forget what politician said it. I think it was JFK, maybe. I don't remember who it was, but there was a politician that decades ago was quoted as saying, "In politics, if you're explaining, you're losing." Sounds like a Nixon thing to say, doesn't it? So maybe that's what it was. Maybe it's him. But the old saying is, if you're explaining, you're losing. Just don't acknowledge your problems. Don't acknowledge your difficulties. Just move on past it, and everybody will forget eventually. But that's not been the approach of the Helldivers team at Arrowhead. They've been very, very transparent with a lot of stuff, updating constantly with support improvements, with patches for PC, PS5, all of this stuff with the patch notes to break it down, just being very, very clear with all of it. And they've been very, very direct. I don't know if it's because the team is smaller. In case you're not familiar, Arrowhead apparently is only about 100 developers and like team members, all told. They are hiring a lot more people. They're bringing on more people to expedite the support plans because the game's been so successful, which is awesome. But it's been interesting to see that they are so open, tweeting like multiple times a day to break down what's going on, what patches they need to send out, login access stuff. Sometimes patches are going up multiple times a day with hot fixes and stuff. It's crazy, crazy cool seeing how transparent they're being with all of this. Known issues that they're working on, trying to figure out how to fix stuff. It's super cool. And Sagar Baroshi is apparently the deputy game director interim at Arrowhead. And he's one of the guys that's working directly on this. And he's actually the guy that wrote this, which you might have seen over the last few days. Because basically what happens was we ran into this when we were playing, actually. We're aware of a problem that has caused some players' rewards to not pay out properly at the end of missions. We're working on a fix for this, but in the meantime, we want to try to alleviate the impact as we head into the weekend. Therefore, from now until the end of this Sunday, February 18th, the game will grant all players XP and requisition at a 50% multiplier on top of your base mission score. You can tell this additional multiplier is active when you see the Game Master effect labeled Accounting Corrections while on the Super Destroyer. Many thanks for your patience and support and for the glorious cascade of memes you've been sharing. Now get back down there, Helldivers, and defend our territory against those automaton incursions. It's just great. Other games would be like, no, we're not going to pay this out. You remember with Fallout 76? So like if you didn't get the bag, or if you got the bag and like you were promised it would be canvas and it showed up and it was this weird trash bag material, if you were upset about it, they gave you 500 atoms to just make up for it, which is like $5 in-game currency. Because they're like, yeah, we're sorry. We're sorry. Yeah, and they just straight up were like, oh, these messages throw me back. This is how other companies have handled these types of live service difficulties and stuff. Your request has been updated. Yeah, the bag included with Fallout 76 Power Armor Edition isn't correct. The bag is advertised as being canvas, but is clearly a much cheaper nylon material that doesn't look at all like the bag in the promotional material for the collector's edition. No response. Can I get a response? Thanks. They finally responded, hello. We are sorry that you aren't happy with the bag. The bag shown in the media was a prototype and was too expensive to make. We aren't planning on doing anything about it. Like you kind of admire the balls, just be like,
Miles just
suck it
now
up,
remember.
you know? You kind of admire the balls. It's kind of funny. Miles, thank you for becoming a member. You know, it's funny that they're just so direct about it. They're like, suck it up, Buttercup. Stop crying. You know, it's just funny. But instead, like that's typically, you know, if we see direct discussion about issues within like live service games, we see stuff like that. But instead, like with Helldivers, we've seen a very, very transparent process where even when there are difficulties or bugs and stuff, they will go out, they'll give you increased requisition and XP that are specifically like directly helpful in gameplay. And other games, you know, they would sell you this solution. They'd be like, yeah, for $5 you get your requisition XP boost, or you can open a loot box that gives you the chance to get a 50% multiplier on requisition XP or something like that. But instead, they just give it to you. Give it to everybody for an entire weekend as an oopsie, we'll fix it. Don't worry. We're sorry. You know, it's admirable. And you can see the response from the community is really, really positive because they're transparent. They're not hiding behind anything. They're just coming out and being like, this is what it is. To add on to all of this, the CEO of Arrowhead, Pyrostedt, I don't know exactly how to pronounce it. He's like the CEO of the company, and he's been super transparent on social media as well. Yeah, one of my favorites, this is the reason why you always simulate everything even when it doesn't make sense at the time. So like they simulate throwing grenades. And so even like with these bugs, they can flick and jump and bounce grenades back at you. So if you don't toss it properly, you can get got by tossing a grenade into the bugs if it bounces off of them. And I've had this happen where like me and my buddies, we're all like trying to hold down the extraction point, waiting for the ship to come in. And I toss in a big old cluster strike orbital and it bounces right back on us. And we all go, ah! We all go sprinting and running away because it's we made an oopsie and this everything's great. When you offer double XP to apologize for your servers overloading, but it just caused people to overload your servers even more. Yeah, that was kind of funny that happened. Yeah, in retrospect, this was maybe not the best idea. Or this one, no gift, but when dialogue and democracy hit at the right time. Let's hear it. What's the line? Kill them all! Some of the dialogue is really funny. One of my favorites is like, for the love of liberty, my leg. I stand by it. I think the game's industry needs a middle ground between pay to win / cosmetics and pay to get stuff that is more or less powerful, but mechanically different. Pay to G-stimable. It doesn't roll off the tongue though. So also you can always play and unlock it. And I mean it for real. I missed this article. It is absolutely what I'm going for when I design games. The concept originates from years of playing pen and paper RPGs where the players manage to turn everything into a farce. No matter if it's Cthulhu or D&D, it always ends up with us crying of laughter. Yeah, and I think it's the key to this, and I don't think it's a coincidence that hardcore players of tabletop RPGs end up being really good video game designers. And I think it's not a coincidence because it kind of makes sense when you break it down. Like for a lot of these games, it seems like so often it's just about putting players on tracks to try and create an experience that's like a very tight bubble. Like, okay, we have this bubble, this is our game, and it's going to be really fun, and you're going to do your thing. You know, we were just talking earlier in the stream about Immortals of Avium. So maybe if we say that, like it's a very tight experience. You have a few core mechanics and you go through your journey, and it's very tight journey going along this path, and then you end up at the end destination and you have a great time. Yay, everybody wins. You played the video game. But with Baldur's Gate or like Helldivers, what you do instead of just creating a little bubble that you've crafted very, very specifically is that you establish a handful of little pillars. And these pillars could be different things like maybe it could be something like if we go with Baldur's Gate, like spells. And then over here we have dialogue, potions. And so each of these mechanics and pillars are just different little pieces of each little bitty thing. So instead of creating this little bubble like Immortals of Avium did, where it's just a tight little experience made up of smaller little bubbles of like the combat system and then the level design and then the enemy design, where it's all just very, very tight. What they do instead is they create these core pillars, and then the rest of the game just kind of sits on top of it. And they hold up the whole game in different ways depending on how you play. Maybe more of the weight is shifted towards the stealth system if you play that way. More weight's going to be shifted to potions or dialogue or spells or the AI systems based on how you play it. Because like when you focus on the core pillars of gameplay and then the rest of the game rests on top, you can have a spell system like I talked about in my recent Baldur's Gate video, where let's say you have the ability to change, like polymorph big end game bosses into sheep, just randomly, just change them into sheep. If you've not seen that video I did. So with this, like there's a very difficult guy that is here normally. I I changed him into a sheep. And because the game is built on those core pillars, the cutscene plays out just fine. Looks a little silly, but it plays out just fine with a floating magical sheep instead of the character that's supposed to be there. And they let you just break it, just like in D&D, because it's built on just core pillars of giving players mechanics. And they don't really overcomplicate it from there. They just give you the mechanics and let you break the game if you want to. And so like in here, we just have like this whole cutscene that plays out talking to a gigantic humanoid looking sheep person because you changed and morphed it into a lamb. You know, it looks insane, but the game was built to let you break it. And I think that that's what I love most about D&D. It's what I love about Baldur's Gate. And in some ways, the same thing kind of applies to Helldivers 2, where they let you break the game. They're okay with you breaking the game if you are creative enough and resourceful enough to come across the solution to it. In this case, it wasn't that useful turning this character into a sheep because just narrative reasons, it doesn't really do anything. And after this, you know, he changes back. But there was another late game boss that I loaded into and I changed into a sheep and just chucked him off the cliffside because I could. And it worked. Like I changed this high level boss into a sheep and then chucked him off a cliff into the ether and completed the encounter. And it's like, yep, that works. That works because it's built on the pillars. In the same way that if you go into the goblin camp early in the game, you can use the potion system, which is tied up with like poisons and stuff. And you can go in and poison the barrel of grog, and then all of the goblins that are there all get poisoned and drop dead because you chose to poison it. You could have gone through dialogue and spoken with the characters and done it that way. You could have gone in and put them all to sleep somehow. You could have just stealthed your way across everything. You could have done different things where like you maybe lit something on fire or you distracted the guards with some spell or potion or reaction or something and had the AI react in a certain way so that you could then go over and use dialogue to sneak in or use the stealth system from there. So they allow all of these pillars to kind of work together. And in the same way with like Helldivers, it probably doesn't look quite like this. Instead with Helldivers, it's probably something more like a pillar of the gunplay, and then there's like a pillar of let's say the core physics, and then there's a pillar of maybe just the dynamic, like you could say the swarms, and then a pillar of the co-op mechanics, and the collaborative stuff that comes from that. So there's all sorts of things where like you have the physics system, which has a blowback for rocket launchers. So if you're holding the rocket launcher and fire it, if another player is standing behind you, they get destroyed. They get blasted far away, if not killed, because of the blast back. So that's the physics system that directly ties into the co-op system. Or if you chuck a grenade and it bounces off one of the bugs, it's tying up initially gameplay, but it ties to the physics system, bounces back, and that could also affect the co-op over here with everybody getting, you know, having their gameplay affected because of something as simple as chucking a grenade and having it bounce weird. So there's so many like interweaving ways that these core pillars can support the weight of the fun of the game or the gameplay experience, if you want to say it like that. And it's just frankly awesome. And that's why I think that there's no mistake that a lot of these designers that make these awesome dynamic games where players can kind of create their own fun and have crazy wacky things happen, I don't think it's a coincidence that so many of them have a background in pen and paper tabletop RPGs. I really don't think it's a coincidence. I think all of it is tied together. I think it's all related, because at the end of the day, like, games are about games are really, at the end of the day, about providing players tools to make their own fun. Sometimes games spill over and it's like more about the narrative thing. You're trying to tell a story, and so it's less about fun. It's more about the story. So sometimes this can change for sure. Sometimes it's less about stories and it's more about providing players the ability to simulate a different reality, like with something like Factorio or Satisfactory or something like that. But most games are trying to provide players systems and tools to create fun experiences. And sometimes I think, as we've seen with Helldivers 2, you don't really have to be that heavy-handed. If you just provide a solid system and let players enjoy the sandbox you've given them, they'll make their own fun. On paper, Helldivers 2 is a really straightforward game. Yeah, you fight waves and take on like little nests of bugs and bases of automatons with other players, completing basic objectives like verifying ore veins or destroying certain points of interest. Really simple if you boil it down to just what's on paper. Really straightforward. But because each of the mechanics is built on interacting with each other, it creates this dynamic thing where players can create really interesting, fun situations for each other. And that's always going to be more, I think, emotionally impactful than developers handcrafting 1,000 different possible encounters, trying to make that feeling for the player, you know? Mega problem is their servers and matchmaking can't log in since Thursday. Yeah, I mean, without a doubt, they've got to figure out their server issues. They've capped it at 450,000. Right now they're under that, so I think they should be good. I think you should be good at this point to go and jump in, because I think they're only at like 270,000 only. 270,000 or something. Helldivers, their issues, they got to figure out their servers. They're probably still capped at like 450,000, which suggests there's about 47,000 in PlayStation servers. So they got to figure that out. It's a good problem to have. There are so many people that want to play your game. It's breaking it. But at the end of the day, if players can't play your game for one reason or another, it's still bad. Still bad.